Right, like to welcome you all here today for the unveiling of the mural you can see behind us. And it's just before we kick it off, I just want to thank one or two people who gave us a hand. There's a lot of people gave us a hand, but the one man in particular, Paul Torbett, he designed it. So with myself, Archie Livingstone and Micheál Fitzsimmons, we come up with a few ideas, but it was Paul himself who came up with the final design. And as you can see, not only is it a very good design, but it's very, very fitting. And it's not just here about Lenadoon, but Joe McDonald is about the 10 Hungerstrikers. And I'm just looking around here. There was men who were in the haste blocks during the blanket protest with Archie, myself, Micheál and others. And there's one or two former Hungerstrikers. So the day that is in it, I'd just like to thank you all for coming here. And it's unbelievable when we think that 40 years ago, and again looking around here, see a lot of people who are... No problem, Alan. There's some people here who, a lot of people are very young, weren't even born 40 years ago. And it's right that we not only commemorate the 10 lads who died in hunger strike, but celebrate their deaths as well, because they were an inspiration to the lads who were on the blanket protest when we knew a lot of lads here who died, and also they're an inspiration to this generation and generations to come, and they should never be forgotten. The same with other people who have died during this struggle, which is far from over. And I'm not even suggesting for 1 minute that we'll go back to those days, but that's up for other people to decide. But we also have to remember 1981, given the year that was in it, and when the British Army, the RUC and their unionist murder gangs were running amok, not only here in Belfast, but throughout the 6 counties, and in fact throughout Ireland. And when we think of the number of people who were killed with plastic bullets, Julie Livingstone, Carol Ann Kelly, this is just in Belfast, Norah McCabe. Also, when we think of another young lad, Danny Barrett, who was shot dead in Ardoyne, sitting on a wall, shot dead by the British Army. The estimation that the British government themselves put out for that particular time, it's a very conservative estimate when they claim that 50,000 plastic bullets were fired. We believe it's far more than that. And for looking around here, I know a lot of people here run about these streets here, not only in Lenadoon, but other parts of Belfast. And when we think of the number of plastic bullets and live rounds that were fired, obviously the IRA was out there, and the IRA was very active as well. But that's we'll talk about that another day. So I'd just like to, as I say, mention also Fian John Dempsey, who died on the day. I was shot dead on the day Joe McDonald died. And speaking of Joe McDonald, I just got a text from Bernadette, who's Joe's daughter. And as for any of you, even if you don't live in Lenadoon, you'd be aware that Joe McDonald was buried. He was waiting in the house just at the end of the street here on Lenadoon Avenue. And Bernadette, she celebrated her 11th birthday on the day Joe was buried. So this is a short message I got from Bernadette this morning. I just want to pass on my sincere apologies for not being with you all today. The support shown for my daddy and his 9 brave comrades, not only today, but over the last 40 years, has always been so strong. When the British government tried to force their criminalisation policy on the prisoners, I am sure they never dreamed they would face the courage and determination of the prisoners not to be broken. It was Bobby Sands that wrote, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." And I know, when I look at my own children and see them laugh and smile on their faces, I always remember what the 10 brave men endured and the difference they have made. They will never be forgotten. Gora Mayagov. That's from Bernadette MacDonald. Where did I put that? So we're going to have a couple of songs, and the first song is going to be sung by Stefan, and so just give a big Belgian bus to Stefan, a bit of order when he's singing this wonderful song.
Come here, good. I am a proud young Irishman in Ulster's hills. My life began a happy boy. Through green fields ran. I kept God's and man's laws. But When my age was barely 10, my country's wrongs were told again by the tens, 1,000 marching men. My heart stirred to the cause. I'll wear no convict's uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fate, 800 years of crime. I learned of centuries of strife, of cruel laws, injustice rife, but I saw now in my own young life the fruits of foreign sway. Protesters threatened, tortured, maimed, divisions nurtured, passions flamed, outrage provoked, rights caused defamed. This is the conqueror's way. I'll wear no convict's uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fate, 800 years of crime. Descendants of proud Connacht's clan, Kincannon serves cruel Britain's hand. Man's inhumanity to man has spurned this trusty slave. No strangers are these bolts and locks, no new designs, these dark age blocks. Cruel Cromwell lives while Thatcher talks, sure the bullies taunt the brave. I'll wear no convict's uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fate, 800 years of crime. But does Britain need 1,000 years of protest, riots, death and tears? Or will the last a decade of fears be an 80-decade swell? An end to Ireland's agony, new hope for human dignity? Or will the last obscenity be this dark age block cell? I'll wear no convict's uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fate, 800 years of crime, 800 years of crime, 800 years of crime.
Come here, Stephen. We'd just like to call on Amy Rafferty to recite read a poem.
I know it's gone. That's a bit of a hard act to follow, but this is a poem by Bobby Sands. It seems to be a bit of a lesser known poem, but it's very fitting for today. So this is The Union Man by Bobby Sands. We were proud, aye, we were at that as we stood in long lines, although weary, hungry and hurt. Proud that we had left our fetters behind us, in the rubble and blood splattered dirt, and the drizzle fell lightly upon our blood blistered hands, and wet our dirty blackened faces. Our ragged clothes smelt of battle, burnt and scorched, with the fight, a terrible fight, and smeared with all its bloody, ugly traces. And the morning air was silent, but shaking the roar of the murderous cannons, dead at least for now. And life stirred as we marched through Dublin streets, at the point of gun, where peeping angry eyes from behind drawn curtains upon us glared, and voices spoke, hatred, whispering and scorning us, though we knew not what they said, and the foggy dew fell down behind us to shroud our Fenian dead. 'Twas a sorrowful time, but a great day for the fighting working man. But the working man was blind to the bloody rose that bloomed upon the land. The working people, dear God, my very own brothers, Dubliners too to a man, turned and spat into my reddened eyes, and I told myself they never understood, and I pitied them, God, I pitied them, that they never heard the dying Fenian cries. And I think, where is Conley who stood for the working man? And that man Pierce, and the old fella Clark, who finally won his day. Aye, and for a nation's sake did the sleeping West awake, and plunge into the fray. I am hurt and tired and captive, but the Irish Citizen Army has trained me well, and I'll tell you, for my nation and James Conley I'd rise again. Aye, I'd rise again and fight my way to hell.
I'd just like to introduce the main speaker here, and just on a personal level, I remember Tommy McKerney being in another H block, but talking to lads who were in different blocks, and it's amazing when we think of how small the jail was in one way. Obviously it was bigger than a lot of jails throughout the country, but a lot of us never even met each other. And it wasn't until last time I went into jail, and I only ever met Tommy once, and that was one time I was in the Red Book and moving from one wing to another, and Tommy so just said had a few words. So just Tommy McKerney, he's from the Moy in County Tyrone, and he done time in the Free State in the early 1970s. In 1977 he was captured, and this is one of the things which we all should always remember, and it does my head in. When I've done a few tours, I'm sure a lot of you have done tours in Crumlin Road Jail, and I'm just digressing slightly here because it does really annoy me when the tours that they do, and I had it out with one of the tour guides. He was all right in talking about ghosts and all that stuff, which is an insult to what the history of that jail. When I turned around and said to him, why have we not even mentioned the very fact that the 10 lads who died on hunger strike in 1981 were all in remand in Crumlin Road Jail? And he says, we can't do it. And I says, why, what's stopping you saying it? I know unionists dictate too much policy in this stinking state that we live in, but especially in the likes of Crumlin Road Jail. And it's a disgrace that whenever we think of every single person who ended up in the H blocks, every man obviously who ended up in the H blocks on the blanket, well, the majority of them were on remand in Crumlin Road Jail. So Tommy McKerney, he was in Crumlin Road Jail. He was sentenced to life. He ended up in the H blocks and immediately joined the blanket protest. And for any of you reading the history of, and Tommy can speak for himself, and I mentioned earlier about the hunger strike and how much it has inspired an outlaw like me today, and other generations are coming after me. When we think of the hunger strike which took place, Tommy and 6 of his comrades were on from the 18th of October for 53 days. And when we think that how close those lads came to death, and then when that hunger strike ended, and we all know the history of Bobby Sands and his 9 comrades and the others who went on, and just looking around here and see a few faces of lads who were on hunger strike, and thankfully they survived. So Tommy has been a lifelong socialist Republican, and as I said, he's done 16 years in the H blocks of Long Cash. And he's now involved in political activity and also trade unionism. So a big Belgian boss for Kenya, Tommy McKerney.
Gormagar Fadrig, while I'm or dus, mochid boekas a horse lahai and kushta a hor and Victor Kifnachan Shaw a bhaim. Agus caharja has a yanu le muncher and counter Shaw agus and counter in Cuchinta a cur and Victor Kifnachan le céile is mór an honor atá filteanach díobhse margheall carré tá janta acah. I'd just like to begin by thanking the committee and the people of the area that put this marvellous mural together to pay tribute to our heroic dead. It's also an honour to be here and invited to perform this address here before the Republican people of this great city. Never forget that this was the city where first the Republican philosophy took root and flowered. And looking around here today at this marvellous crowd that has turned out to commemorate 40 years since that enormous sacrifice, that the spirit that was founded here over 2 centuries ago lives and lives so splendidly well. Forty years have passed since 10 men gave their lives in a hunger strike. And sometimes there comes a moment in the most intense of conflicts, in the bitterest of battles or the most ferocious of struggles, when an event of such incredible courage occurs, deeds that are so significant in their exceptionality that the world stops to gaze in amazement. And such a series of events took place through the 1981 hunger strike, when 10 Republican revolutionaries gave their lives so that the Republican cause, the Irish Republican cause, would survive and prosper and ultimately achieve its long sought for objective of an independent, sovereign Irish Republic built for the well-being of all our people. So friends and comrades, let's just reflect for a moment on what happened in the years previous to that hunger strike, so that we get an idea of the magnitude of the event, the magnitude of what took place then, the challenge that was faced through that bitter, intense but glorious period in 1981. A century ago, this misfortunate 6-county political entity was founded by the British Empire to protect its western flank, using local reactionaries to support it. It was no accident that this state, this misfortunate 6-county entity, was formed. It was deliberately set about, established to protect the British Empire, and thereafter the British Empire sought to protect its asset on its western flank. That's what was at stake. 50 years this state existed in the most evil, discriminatory and brutal of form, formed in vengeance, blood, brutality in the 1920s, maintained by force of arms, discrimination, sectarianism for 50 years, until challenged in such a way that its existence as an asset for the empire was in doubt, challenged by the absolute resilience of the Republican people, and no more so than the heroic Republican people of this city. 50 years after the foundation of the state, having lived for decades under the heel of a brutal Orange state supported by Britain, the people of this town, the Republican people of this city, showed amazing resilience, amazing courage, amazing ability to resist and to fight back, and in effect to break the stranglehold that had been placed on them for over 50 years. And that was the challenge that had been led before the empire and its assets on this island. And keep in mind, the empire of which we talk, a blood-stained, brutal empire, known from Cairo to the Cape for its brutality, for its greed, for its vengeance. From Baghdad to Bombay to Beijing, known for the blood-stained reign of terror it had perpetrated on other peoples across this globe. And when it was faced with resistance in Ireland, it's hardly surprising that its reputation went before it. That the vast majority of the good and decent people of this world saw in Ireland not some local sectarian row or scuffle, but for what it was, and what it was indeed, a struggle for liberation and to break free from imperial domination. Hardly surprising that those other nations that had experienced the brutality of the British Empire with its blood-stained history would see and understand what was happening. And the challenge that was laid down was enormous to the British. And let's keep in mind also, this resistance frightened others on this island. Not just the unionist domination of the 6 counties, but the colonial mentality of the 26 as well, south of the border. And so the British and their allies sought to change the narrative, to create a narrative that what was happening here was not that battle for freedom, for liberation, but indeed was a criminal conspiracy, and therefore they implemented their programme of criminalisation. Criminalisation was a well thought out strategy. We know what they've said to have, in the words of Bobby Sands, to change 800 years of history into one long crime. And with the power and the might and the wealth of the British and their imperial allies, that's what they sought to do. And on the 1st of March 1976, Merlin Rees, Secretary of State for this place called Northern Ireland, a member of the British Labour Party, which, seeing what it is today, is hardly surprising that it was the British Labour Party that introduced criminalisation under the premiership of Harold Wilson. Special category status that had been granted some years earlier was to be ended on the 1st of March 1976 for those who was captured thereafter. Little did the British and their allies think for a moment, little did they understand the resilience of the Republican people of this country. And on the 14th of September 1976, Kieran Nugent from this town refused to wear the criminal uniform, refused to compromise his principles, refused to conform with the new regime. And I'm also aware that it was not just in the H blocks, but standing looking here too at some of the great heroic women in Armagh who also struggled. But we also keep in mind that the struggle was not just confined to the prisons, because our people rallied round to support and understood. For 5 years, a protest, intense, bitter, brutal and difficult, lasted in the H blocks and in Armagh jail. In the H blocks, our prisoners were stripped naked, confined to the cell, and brutality was a daily experience at the hands of a vengeful prison service. In the wing that I was, I knew personally 5 of our past fallen comrades. For all those years that I knew Bobby Sands, we always referred to him as Robert. We always used his name in Irish. Full of energy, full of life. Never a minute did he sit down. Martin Hurson. And these are the things that are so hard possibly to bring to mind 40 years later. Martin Hurson, neighbour of my own, to those of us that knew him, his singing, appalling that it was, sparked a memory. Frank Hughes, such a humorous man. Tom McElwee, Tom, the man that never took any nonsense from the prison officers. Many's a screw found himself on the floor when Tom took him in his hands. Yes, and Kevin Lynch from Dungiven. Kevin, always being tormented and returning the torments at the hands of witty city men. But that was where we got to know each other so well. And then the terror, the horror, the awfulness of that hunger strike began when Robert started on the 1st of March. A hunger strike so awful in its intensity, so awful in its outcome. And just for the second it takes, or the few seconds it takes, let's just recall the names. Bobby Sands, Frank Hughes, Raymond McCreesh, Patsy O'Hara, Joe MacDonald, Martin Hurson, Kevin Lynch, Tom McElwee, Kieran Doherty, Mick Devine. 10 men, each one of them in their 20s. We've heard here of our neighbour Joe MacDonald, waked just at the end of the street. The sacrifice, enormous. The pain, unbelievable. The response from our people was magnificent. Day and daily, on every street, every country laneway, the length and breadth of this country, the great Republican people of this country rallied to the support of the blanket men led by their hunger strikers. A new chapter was written. A glorious page had been inscribed in the annals of Irish republicanism. And the outcome, comrades, the outcome was a political earthquake of global dimensions. And just let me briefly talk of the extent, the ramifications of that hunger strike. 5,000 students marching in Milan, the British consulate in Ghent raided, the opposition in the Portuguese parliament standing in opposition to what had happened to the hunger strikers, French towns and cities with streets named after them. The president of Iran sent a personal message to the family of the Sands. Palestinian prisoners sent messages of solidarity. In the Indian parliament, the opposition stood in support. And in South Africa, in a cell on Robben Island, Nelson Mandela, the great Nelson Mandela, wrote on his diary, IRA martyr Bobby Sands dies. And in Havana, Fidel Castro wrote and spoke, and the words he said was, let tyrants tremble before men who are capable of dying for their ideals after 60 days on a hunger strike. He said it is high time for the world community to put an end to this repulsive atrocity through denunciation and pressure. Fidel Castro speaking, and I think if I could just take this opportunity to send our best wishes to the Cuban people in their struggle to maintain their independence and sovereignty and call for an end to the vicious blockade of their island nation. Thank you, Gurmil Magov. The outcome of that hunger strike. It was no longer possible in the aftermath of the hunger strike, with Bobby Sands elected to the Westminster Parliament with a massive 30,000 plus votes, Kieran Doherty elected as a hunger striker to the Southern Irish Parliament, the Dáil, along with another blanket man, Paddy Agnew from Dundalk. Thousands on the streets. Britain's pretense that this was a criminal enterprise had been wiped clean from the slate. No longer could they claim that this was a criminal conspiracy. Yet also, away from the public political arena, the deep state in Britain began to make its long-term calculations. Long-term calculations about what it had seen as the Irish question for years. And those calculations were profound and long-term. There had been very large, undeniable, proactive support for the Republican cause, both north and south, and particularly among the young. It was also obvious the depth and intensity of that commitment, and it wasn't going to easily be overturned. Also, the British had to accept quietly and internally, because this is where decisions are made in Britain, not necessarily in the House of Commons, not necessarily by those loudmouths rattling rhetoric from the benches of the Commons, but the civil servants, the deep state, the people behind the scenes. And they then realised there was no longer any prospect of seeing this struggle peter out as they had hoped for with their criminalisation policy, that they were going to be forced to deal long term with the situation here. And ultimately, the depth of resistance, the organisation of the resistance, coupled with the changing electoral makeup, was going to make it impossible for to hold this 6-county state in perpetuity with a military physical presence in Ireland. And thus began what's probably the long retreat from Ireland of Britain's physical presence. Not thanks to negotiations, but thanks to the physical opposition of committed Republican people. But let's not forget, let's keep in mind that when we're dealing with the British, that we're dealing with an expert, long practiced imperial power. And where they retreat on one hand, they will retreat on their own terms, just as they did in 1920-21. They will leave behind where they can a regime suited to their aims and objectives, to create a neo-colonial state as they have down south of the border. And for that reason we must be careful when we consider the situation today. Because the challenge we face today is to ensure that we do not allow this to happen. The challenge is to pay a fitting tribute to those who have given their lives in the noble Republican cause of an independent, sovereign Irish Republic. To the 10 heroes that we commemorate today, and to all our fallen comrades, those patriots who have given their lives over the generations in so many years of conflict with the Empire. We owe them a debt as they challenge us from beyond the grave. And the challenge that they make to us is to pay them the only fitting tribute that their sacrifice deserves, and that indeed is to build that independent, sovereign, all-Ireland Republic for which they give their lives, their precious young lives. And that we promise, we make that vow that we will honour and pay fitting tribute to the courage and sacrifice of all our patriots, but particularly the 10 who died in the H blocks in 1981. So gur míle mai agah.
Tommy, just going to wrap up here, and before we do, just like to give a few presentations to a number of people. And this is all with all due respect to others who helped finance the mural, helped us in other ways, but there's only so much we can give out. So the first person I want to present a copy of the mural to is Alan Daly, who was without him last night. We would still be here putting that mural up. So Alan, Taryn Shaw, that's all. What's that lead?
What's the lead?
Amy Rafferty, who recited the poem by Bobby Sands, The Union Man. Very fitting poem today. The singer, Stefan. And last but not least, myself. Sorry. Tommy, Cowell Tommy. Cowell Tommy. Tommy.
What's the lead? Come on.
What's the lead? What's the lead?
Here.
Right, folks, we're just going to finish off here with Stefan singing a song. I know it's one of the most popular songs that I've heard over, in my humble opinion. It's the best song the Wolf Tones have ever written and ever sung. I'll say nothing about the Wolf Tones playing shortly here, but that's another story. But it's a famous song, and it's sung throughout Ireland, throughout the world. And I would just ask you, please, again, you have to bear with me, I'm an old grump, but please don't be clapping in the middle of this song when each of the lads' names are mentioned. We'll have to give it a fitting tribute to, it's about Joe McDonald, of course, it's called Joe McDonald, but in memory of all the Hungerstrikers. So, Gura Mila Mayogov, I continue chatting, showing you, August, Stefan.
Oh, my name is Joe McDonald. From Belfast town I came. That city I will never see again. For it's in the town of Belfast I spent many happy days. I love that town in oh so many ways. For it's there I spent my childhood and found for me a wife. I then set out to make for her a life. But all my young ambitions met with bitterness and hate. I soon found myself inside a prison gate. And you dare to call me a terrorist while you look down your gun. When I think of all the deeds that you have done. You have plundered many nations, divided many lands. You have terrorized our people. You rule with an iron hand, and you brought this reign of terror to my land. Through those many months of internment in the Maidstone and Longcash, I thought about my land throughout those days. Why my country they divided, why I was now in jail, in prison without crime and without trial. And although I love my country, I'm not a bitter man, but I've seen cruelty and injustice at first hand. So then, one faithful morning, I shook bold freedom's hand. For right or wrong, I'll try to free my land. And you dare to call me a terrorist while you look down your gun, when I think of all the deeds that you have done. You have plundered many nations, divided many lands. You have terrorized their people. You rule with an iron hand, and you brought this reign of terror to my land. Then one cold October's morning, trapped in a lion's den, I found myself in prison once again. I was committed to the H blocks for 14 years or more. On the blanket, the conditions they were poor. So a hunger strike we did commence for the dignity of man. But it seemed to me that no one gave a damn. But now I am a saddened man. I've watched my comrades die. If only people cared or wondered why. And you dare to call me a terrorist while you look down your gun, when I think of all the deeds that you have done. You have plundered many nations, divided many lands. You have terrorized our people. You rule with an iron hand, and you brought this reign of terror to my land. But may God shine on you, Bobby Sands, for the courage you have shown. May your glory and your name be widely known. And young Francis Hughes and Ray McCreesh, who died unselfishly. Then Patsy O'Hara, and next in line is me. And to those who lie behind me, may your courage be the same. Oh, but I pray to God my life was not in vain. Oh, sad and bitter was that year of 1981. For everything I've lost, sure nothing's won. Grab my elbow, Carja.